The necklace was the only thing my mother left me that wasn't paperwork. She died in February of 1971 when I was 11, and what I remember most about that winter is the sound of my father's voice on the phone with the bank, and the way the snow kept falling in Spokane like it had forgotten how to stop. My Aunt Vivian came down from Coeur d'Alene to sort through my mother's things. She was efficient about it, the way a woman has to be when she's grieving her own sister. Most of what my mother owned went into cardboard boxes that got labeled in black marker and stacked in the garage. But the necklace, my aunt put into my hand directly, closed my fingers around it, and said, "Your mother told me once that her grandmother brought this from Norway in a coffee tin. Don't ever let anyone tell you it isn't worth anything." I was 11. I didn't fully understand what she meant. I understood years later. The necklace was a long oval locket on a thin gold chain, with a pattern of small leaves pressed into the metal around the edge. The chain had been replaced at least twice over the generations because gold wears thin in the places where it rubs against skin. The locket itself was the old part. Inside, behind the hinged front, my great-great-grandmother had pressed a small piece of folded linen with 3 names embroidered on it in red thread, the names of her 3 sisters who had stayed behind in Trondheim when she came across the water in 1889. I learned later that the locket's back panel had a second hinge, a hidden compartment behind the photograph slot, and that this was the real reason my great-great-grandmother had bought it. Women in 1889 needed places to hide things. Banknotes. Letters. Promises that couldn't be kept in the open. I wore the necklace every day for 53 years. Through my wedding to Daniel in 1980. Through the birth of our daughter Bryn in 1983. Through Daniel's first heart attack in 1999, which he survived, and his second in 2011, which he did not. Through my retirement from the Coos County Library System in 2018, where I had worked for 31 years cataloging Oregon coastal history for a collection nobody outside 3 counties had ever heard of. Through the slow narrowing of my life from a 4-bedroom house in North Bend to a small cottage on the bluffs above Sunset Bay, where the cedar siding turned silver in the salt air and the deer ate my lupins every spring and I let them because the lupins came back anyway and the deer didn't have anywhere else to go. I was 68 when Bryn called me in March about the necklace. The call she made wasn't about the necklace, exactly. It was about a road trip. But the necklace is what it became about, so that's how I think of it now. "Mom," she said, "Connor and I want to take you to Crater Lake. The kids have spring break the second week of April. We thought it would be good for you." It had been 3 years since Daniel died. Bryn lived in Eugene with her husband Connor and their 2 children, my granddaughters, Marlo who was 10 and Pia who was 6. They had not visited me in Sunset Bay since the previous summer, and I had not driven up to Eugene since Christmas, because the drive on Highway 38 along the Umpqua had started to tire me in a way it hadn't when Daniel was alive to share it. So when Bryn suggested the trip, I said yes before she had finished the sentence. "That's wonderful," I said. "I'll bring the picnic things. Don't worry about food. We'll handle it. Just pack a small bag. We're only gone 4 days." I packed the small bag. I also did something I hadn't done in months, which was open the small velvet pouch in the top drawer of my dresser and take out the necklace and put it on. I had stopped wearing it daily after Daniel died because the gold against my skin reminded me of his hands on my collarbone and I couldn't bear it. But for a trip with my daughter and her family, I thought, the necklace should come. My mother would have wanted to come along. The trip went fine for the first day and a half. Connor drove. He drove the way he did everything, with both hands on the wheel and a podcast playing too loud, some man's voice talking about real estate, market cycles, undervalued assets. Bryn sat in the passenger seat and read things on her phone and laughed at things on her phone and occasionally turned around to ask Marlo to stop kicking the back of her seat. Pia slept against my shoulder for most of the first afternoon. Marlo drew in a notebook, glancing up at me occasionally with the appraising look she had inherited from her father, the look that said she was deciding what to make of me. The lake was extraordinary. I had seen it before, twice, both times with Daniel, but the color of it never stopped being a small shock. We stayed 2 nights at a lodge in Prospect, and Connor took photos of all of us at the rim, and I let myself believe for a few hours that my family had decided to include me again, that the long silence after Daniel's funeral was finally over and Bryn had remembered I was her mother. The second evening at the lodge, after the girls were in bed, I sat with Bryn on the small porch of our cabin and she asked me, in a tone she had not used with me in years, about my mother. She wanted to know how my mother had died. I had told her before, several times over the years, but she had not asked since she was a teenager, and I had assumed she had stopped wanting to know. I told her again. I told her about the cancer, which had been in my mother's stomach by the time anyone caught it, and about the 4 months between the diagnosis and the funeral, and about the way my father had stopped speaking to me for almost a year afterward because I had my mother's face and he could not stand to look at it. Bryn listened the whole way through. When I was finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, what was Grandma like? I mean really. Was she funny? Was she nice?" And I told her about my mother, the parts of my mother I remembered, which by 68 had narrowed to a handful of clear images, her hands kneading bread, her voice singing in Norwegian when she thought no one was listening, the way she had pressed her thumb between my eyebrows when I had a headache. Bryn listened. She did not look at her phone the entire time. When I was finished, she said, "I wish I had known her." And I almost cried, because in that moment I believed her, and because I would later have to decide whether what she had been doing on that porch was meaning what she said or measuring me for what was about to come. I think about that conversation more than I would like to. I think about it because for 15 minutes that night I had my daughter back, the way she had been at 22 when she came home from college for Christmas her senior year, and we drove out to the Cape together and sat in the car watching the gray ocean, and she told me she was afraid she was not going to know what to do with her life. I had told her then that nobody knew what to do with their lives and that the people who said they did were lying. She had laughed. She had said, "Mom, you always say the right thing." I had not known, sitting on the porch at Prospect, whether she was the woman she had been on the Cape or the woman she had been becoming, and I would not know until 26 hours later when she flicked her wrist on the shoulder of Highway 38. It was on the drive back, on the second morning, that I noticed Bryn was watching the necklace. She watched it the way you watch a price tag. She watched it while pretending not to. We were back on the road by 10, headed west out of Prospect on Highway 62, and she had her body turned half toward the back seat the way people do when they want to look casual about something they are not casual about, and her eyes kept catching on the gold at my throat. I touched the locket without meaning to. It is a habit I have had since I was a child. Then Bryn said, light as anything, "Mom, why do you still wear that thing?" "It was your great-great-great-grandmother's," I said. "You know that." "I know. I just mean, it's so old. The chain is practically wire. Aren't you scared of breaking it?" "I've worn it for 53 years and it isn't broken yet." "Just saying." She turned back around. "It looks like junk, Mom. From a distance. People probably think you got it at a yard sale." Connor laughed, a small dry laugh, and didn't take his eyes off the road. Marlo was watching me in the rearview mirror. I met her eyes and she looked away quickly. I did not respond to my daughter, because I had learned in the 3 years since Daniel died that responding to Bryn when she said things like that only invited more of them. I looked out the window at the pines going past and I held the locket between my thumb and forefinger and felt the warm small weight of it. We stopped for lunch in Roseburg at a chain restaurant off the freeway. The 4 of them got out. I told Bryn I needed the bathroom, and I went inside, and in the bathroom I took the necklace off and put it in the small zippered inner pocket of my purse. I don't know why I did it. Or rather, I do know. I did it because something in the way Bryn had looked at the necklace had made me feel that it was no longer safe on my own body. I did not tell Bryn I had taken it off. I sat down at the table and ate a sandwich I could not taste, and Connor talked about a property he was looking at in Veneta, and Marlo asked me if I wanted to play tic-tac-toe on a napkin, and I said yes, and we played 4 games, and she won 3 of them on purpose because she had figured out at 10 years old that grown-ups liked it when you let them win once. After lunch we got back in the car. We had about 3 hours left to get to Sunset Bay where they were going to drop me off before driving back up to Eugene. Connor took 138 toward Elkton and then planned to cut south on 38 along the Umpqua. It is one of the most beautiful drives in the state. The river runs green and slow through stands of myrtlewood and the road bends around the water for 60 miles before it spills out into the coastal plain. About 20 miles in, Pia started crying. She was overtired and she wanted her stuffed rabbit, and the rabbit was in the back of the car, in the cargo area, packed inside one of the suitcases. Bryn snapped at Connor to pull over. Connor pulled over onto a wide gravel shoulder where the river was visible through a gap in the trees. Bryn got out and went around to the back to dig through the suitcase. Marlo got out to stretch her legs. Connor stayed in the driver's seat and looked at his phone. I got out too. I walked a few steps toward the river, just to feel the air. The sound of the Umpqua moving past was the kind of sound that fills your chest if you let it. I stood there for maybe a minute with my hand on the necklace through the lining of my purse, feeling the small hard shape of the locket. Then I heard Bryn's voice behind me, loud. Mom, what is this? I turned around. She was holding my purse. She had opened it. The zippered inner pocket was open. The necklace was in her hand. Why did you take it off? You said you always wear it. I just wanted to keep it safe in the car. Safe from what? You're in the car with us. I didn't say anything. I couldn't think of what to say that wouldn't make the situation worse. The truth was that I had wanted to keep it safe from her, from the way she had been looking at it. But you cannot say that to your own daughter on the side of the road in Oregon in April with your 6-year-old granddaughter crying in the car behind you. Mom. She held the necklace up by the chain and let the locket spin slowly. You know Connor and I had it appraised. What? At Christmas. When you were asleep on the couch. I took it off the side table for 10 minutes. I had a friend look at it. She has a shop in Eugene. She does estate jewelry. I felt the bottom of my stomach drop out. Mom. It's worth, like, $80. Maybe $100. The gold is too thin to melt down. The locket itself is plated, not solid. We didn't want to tell you because we knew you'd be upset. But you don't have to wear it like it's some kind of treasure. It's not a treasure. It's a sentimental thing. You can keep it in a box. I stared at her. I tried to make my face do nothing. I have always been good at making my face do nothing. It was a skill I learned from 31 years across a reference desk listening to people complain about late fees. Give it back, please, I said. I will. I just want you to hear me. We've been worried about you. You wear this thing every day. You touch it when you talk. It's like a security blanket. Daddy's been gone 3 years, Mom. You need to start moving forward. Bryn. Give me the necklace. Fine. What happened next, I have replayed in my head so many times that I am not sure anymore which version is the real one and which version is the version I have built from grief. The version I think is real is this. She held the necklace out toward me. I reached for it. As I reached for it, she turned her wrist. She did not throw it the way you would throw a ball. She flicked it. It was a small motion of her wrist, almost casual, the kind of motion you would use to flick a cigarette but off a porch. The chain came open in the air like a thin gold streamer and the locket went with it, in an arc, over the gravel shoulder, over the lip of the embankment, down through the alder branches that grew thick along the slope, and into the river. Or into the brush above the river. I could not tell from where I was standing. It made no sound that I could hear over the water. For 3 seconds I could not move. Then I made a noise that wasn't a word, and I went toward the embankment, and Bryn grabbed my arm. Mom, stop. Mom. It's gone. It's gone, it's not worth breaking your hip over, Mom, stop. Let go of me. Mom, it's $80. It's $80 of plated metal. We'll get you a new chain. I'll get you a new one. I pulled my arm out of her hand and I went to the edge of the embankment and I looked down. The slope was maybe 15 feet of loose dirt and tree roots and rotting alder leaves, ending in a tangle of brush above the riverbank, and beyond the brush the green water of the Umpqua moving slow and deep. There was no way to see anything from where I stood. The light coming through the alder canopy was patchy and the ground was a confusion of brown and gray. "Mom, get back in the car." I turned around. Marla was standing about 10 feet away with her hand over her mouth. Connor was still in the driver's seat. He had looked up from his phone but he had not gotten out. "Bryn," I said, "go get me a flashlight from the car." "Mom, I am not climbing down there." "You are not climbing down there. We have 3 hours to drive. Pia is exhausted. We will call someone. We will call a service. People do this. They have metal detectors." "It isn't metal." "What?" "The locket isn't solid metal. It's plated. You said so yourself. A metal detector won't find it." "Mom." Her voice changed. It got slower, the way you talk to someone you are about to give bad news to, or someone you are about to lie to. "Mom, listen to me. We need to get on the road. I will call someone tomorrow. I promise. Connor and I will come back next weekend and we will look for it together. I promise. But right now we have to go." I knew, standing there on the gravel shoulder of Highway 38 with the sound of the Umpqua in my ears, that she was not going to call anyone tomorrow, and Connor was not going to come back next weekend, and the necklace was going to lie in the leaves above the river until the November rains washed it down into the deep water and it would never be found by anyone. And my mother's grandmother's small piece of red-stitched linen would dissolve into the silt of the Umpqua, and the second hinge that Bryn did not know about would corrode shut, and what was inside the second hinge would be lost. I did not tell Bryn what was inside the second hinge. I had never told anyone what was inside the second hinge, except Daniel, and Daniel had been dead for 3 years. "Take me home," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. I think she was surprised. I think she had expected me to fight harder. I had been fighting her about small things for years and she was used to it, and when I did not fight her about this, the largest thing, I think it confused her, and I think the confusion read on her face for half a second before she covered it. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Mom. Let's get you home." We got back in the car. Connor pulled back onto the highway. Bryn put her hand on his thigh in a way I had not seen her do in years, a gesture of relief, the gesture of a woman whose plan had gone better than she had expected. Marla was looking at me. I would not meet her eyes. We drove the rest of the way to Sunset Bay in near silence. Pia had her rabbit. Pia slept. Connor put on his podcast again, lower this time, and the man on the podcast talked about distressed assets and patient capital, and I sat in the back seat with my hand pressed flat against my breastbone where the small weight of the locket had been every day for 53 years, and I felt nothing where it should have been. They dropped me at my cottage at 4:30 in the afternoon. Connor carried my bag to the porch. Bryn hugged me at the door. She hugged me longer than she usually did. "Mom, I'm sorry about the necklace," she said into my hair. "I really am. I shouldn't have flicked it like that. I was just trying to hand it to you. I feel terrible." "It's all right," I said. "We'll come back this weekend. Connor and I. We'll find it." "That's fine, dear. I love you, Mom. I love you too." I closed the door behind them and I stood in my kitchen and I listened to their car pull away down the gravel drive, and when the sound of the engine had gone past the bend by the salmonberry hedge, I sat down at my kitchen table and I put my hands flat on the wood and I cried for the first time in 3 years. I cried the way you cry when you have understood something you have been refusing to understand for a long time, and the understanding has cost you everything it was going to cost you, and now there is nothing left to lose. Then I got up. I took a kitchen knife and I cut the velvet pouch in the top drawer of my dresser open along its seam, because I had nowhere else to put my anger and the pouch was the closest thing. I went into the kitchen and I made a list on the back of a grocery receipt. The list had 4 items on it. 1. Drive back to the spot tomorrow at first light. 2. Bring a rake, gloves, a sieve, a flashlight, and rain boots. 3. Do not tell Bryn. 4. Call Margaret. I will tell you about Margaret in a minute. First I have to tell you about the 3 days. I left the cottage at 5:15 the next morning. It was still dark. The drive from Sunset Bay to the spot on Highway 38 takes about an hour and a half if you push it, and I pushed it. I had my old Subaru, the one Daniel and I had bought used in 2014, with 218,000 miles on it and a transmission that hesitated on the steep grades but always caught itself. I had a thermos of coffee. I had a peanut butter sandwich. I had the list on the receipt folded into my coat pocket. I knew where the spot was. I had been counting mile markers in the back seat the day before because that is the kind of thing my brain does when it is trying not to scream. The spot was at mile marker 51, on the south side of the highway, just past where the road bends around a bluff and the river comes back into view through the alders. I parked on the gravel shoulder. The sun was just starting to come up over the ridge behind me, and the light coming down through the trees was the gray-pink light of an Oregon dawn in April, the light that makes everything look like it is underwater. I climbed down the embankment. I am 68 years old. I have not climbed down an embankment in 20 years. I went on my backside most of the way, holding on to alder roots and small saplings, and I tore the seat of my pants on a piece of broken root halfway down, and at the bottom I had to sit for 2 full minutes because my heart was doing something it did not usually do. Then I got up and I started looking. The brush at the bottom of the slope was a thick mat of last fall's alder leaves and salmonberry canes and the dead lower branches of a big leaf maple. The river was maybe 12 feet farther on, past a strip of round stones. The locket, if it had come down the slope at all, could be anywhere in a strip about 30 feet long and 10 feet wide. If it had cleared the brush and gone into the river, it was gone. I told myself it had not gone into the river. I had to. So I told myself. I worked in a grid. I had been a librarian for 31 years and I knew how to work in a grid. I marked off a section of the brush with sticks pushed into the ground, and I went through it leaf by leaf, lifting them with my rake and sifting the loose dirt below them through a kitchen sieve. The sieve was for the chain. The chain had broken, I was sure of it, and the chain in pieces would be the hardest thing to find. The locket was bigger and might catch the light. The chain would not. I worked for 9 hours that first day. I worked through 3 sections of the grid. I found a beer can from the 70s, a fishing lure, 2.22 shells, the lid of a tin of chewing tobacco, and a single tarnished penny from 1962. I did not find the necklace. Around noon I sat down with my back against the trunk of the big leaf maple and I ate the peanut butter sandwich and I drank some of the coffee, which was lukewarm by then, and I thought about Daniel. I thought about a Saturday morning in 1989 when Bryn had been 6 years old and she had lost a small jade fish that Daniel had given her, a green soapstone carving from a market in Vancouver, and the 3 of us had spent 4 hours combing the backyard of the house in North Bend, the 3 of us on our hands and knees in the grass, and we had found it under the hydrangea, and Bryn had cried, and Daniel had said, "Brinny, things you love are worth looking for. Even the small ones. Especially the small ones." Bryn had remembered that lesson for a while. She had carried the jade fish in her pocket for years. I do not know when she had stopped carrying it. I do not know when she had stopped believing the lesson. I do not know when the believing had been replaced with whatever had replaced it. A man stopped his pickup truck on the shoulder above me around 1 in the afternoon and called down to ask if I needed help. I said no, thank you. He said, "You sure?" I said yes. He drove away. 20 minutes later, a state trooper pulled onto the shoulder, and I thought, the man called him, and I straightened up and I prepared to explain myself to a stranger in a uniform who was going to think I was a confused old woman who had wandered off from a memory care facility. But the trooper was a woman, and she came down the slope partway in her boots and she looked at me, and she said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'm looking for something I lost," I said. What did you lose? A necklace. It belonged to my great-great-grandmother. She was quiet for a moment. She was maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back tight under her hat, and a face that had seen a lot of things but had not gotten hard about them. When did you lose it? Yesterday afternoon. Here? Right about here. Above the embankment. She looked at the slope. She looked at the river. She looked at my hands, which were filthy and scratched. Ma'am, can I ask how it got down here? I thought about lying. I thought about saying it had slipped off the chain while I was walking. But I was 68 and I had been crying for most of the past 16 hours and I had no energy left for lies. My daughter threw it out the car window, I said. She said it was junk. She was angry with me about something. The trooper looked at me for a long second. Then she nodded, once, slowly, the way you nod when someone has just told you something you have heard before in some form. Okay, she said. What's your name? Iris Halvik. I'm Trooper Ramsey. Becca. Look, I'm off in 2 hours. I keep a metal detector in my truck for a different reason, but I have one. Will you be here at 4? I'll be here. Don't fall in the river, Mrs. Halvik. I won't. She came back at 4. She brought the metal detector and she brought a thermos of soup and 2 ham sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and she did not ask me any more questions about my daughter, and we worked the brush together for 2 hours until the light went. The detector pinged on the .22 shells and on a horseshoe nail and on what turned out to be a corroded lipstick tube from probably the 1980s. It did not ping on the necklace. Plated gold doesn't read well on these, Becca said. Especially old plate. You knew that. I knew that. You're coming back tomorrow. Yes. What time? 5:30. I'll be here at 3. I'm off again tomorrow at 2. Before she left, she asked me if I had anyone to drive home with me. I told her I had driven myself out. She watched my hands for a moment, the way they were shaking from the cold and from 9 hours of crawling, and she said, Mrs. Halvik, if you ever decide to tell me more about your daughter, you can. I have heard a lot of these stories. I do not get tired of hearing them. I am sorry that you have one to tell. Then she walked back up the slope to her cruiser and she drove away, and I sat for another 5 minutes in the gathering dark before I could trust my legs to climb back up. I cried again in my car on the drive back to Sunset Bay. I cried because a state trooper named Becca Ramsey had given me a ham sandwich and the kindness of it was more than I could carry. When I got home, I called Margaret. Margaret Aizawa had been the head reference librarian at the Coos Bay branch for 12 years before she retired to write a book about the Japanese fishing families who had worked the Oregon coast before the war and the internment that had taken them away from it. Her grandfather had been one of them. She was 66. She had never married. She lived in a small house in Charleston with 2 cats and a long, patient, ongoing argument with the Oregon Historical Society about a collection of letters she felt belonged on the coast and not in Portland. She was the closest thing I had to a sister, and what she had been before she was a reference librarian was an investigative reporter for the Eugene Register-Guard, where she had broken 3 stories about timber fraud and one about a county commissioner taking bribes from a gravel company. I told her everything. The necklace. The road trip. The flick of the wrist. The 3 years. The look in Bryn's eyes when she had said the word junk. The thing inside the second hinge. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Iris, what was inside the second hinge? A key, I said. And a piece of paper. Folded very small. What did the paper say? It said my husband's name and a number. The number is the account number of a safe deposit box in the Umpqua Bank in North Bend. The key opens the box. The box has been in Daniel's name since 1994. I have never opened it. Daniel told me about it 3 weeks before he died. He said, Iris, if Bryn ever lets you down in a way you cannot come back from, open the box. If she doesn't, never open the box. Burn the key. Promise me. Iris. I know. What is in the box? I don't know. You don't know. I don't know. I promised him I would not open it unless I had to. And now you have to. I don't have the key anymore. Margaret was quiet again. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear one of her cats, the loud one, complaining about something in the background. Iris, she said finally, I am going to drive to your house tomorrow morning. I am going to bring my notebook. I am going to bring my old camera. I am going to bring the file I keep on Connor Hales because I have had a file on Connor Hales for 2 years and I have never told you about it because I did not have anything that would have helped you, and now I think I do. What? Your son-in-law. Your daughter's husband. The real estate man. Margaret, what are you telling me? I am telling you that I will be at your house at 9 tomorrow morning. I am telling you to look for the necklace at first light and to come home by 8:30. I am telling you to make coffee. Margaret. What do you have a file on Connor for? She paused. Then she said, I have a file on Connor because in 2022 a woman in Florence came into the library on the day I happened to be visiting and asked Pat at the reference desk if there was a way to find out whether a charity was real. She had given $14,000 to an organization called Cedar Hands that helped widows. Pat called me over because Pat knew I had worked at the paper. The woman's name was Dorothea Selk. She was 73. Her husband had died in November of 2021. A young man and a young woman from Cedar Hands had come to her door in January and offered to help her sort through her husband's things, free of charge, as part of a grief support program. They were very kind. They took away 9 boxes. 3 months later her son in Portland visited and asked where his father's coin collection was. It had been in a wooden box on the closet shelf. The box had not been on the closet shelf for some time. Dorothea told me she could not remember if she had given it to the young people from Cedar Hands. She thought she might have. She wasn't sure. It is hard to remember things sometimes after your husband dies, Iris, you know that. Margaret. Connor Hales is the registered agent of Cedar Hands. I found out the day after Dorothea told me her story. I had been waiting 2 years to find someone else who had been to one of his door knocks. I never found one. I think your daughter is the door knock now. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. I was still in my torn pants. My phone was hot against my ear. Iris, are you there? I'm here. Look for the necklace tomorrow. Come home by 8:30. I will be there at 9. Yes. Iris. Yes. You're going to be all right. Do you hear me? Yes. Now eat something. Eat something and go to sleep. I did not sleep. I ate a piece of toast and a hard-boiled egg and I drank a glass of milk standing at my kitchen counter, and then I lay down on the couch in the front room because I could not bring myself to go into the bedroom that still had Daniel's reading lamp on his side of the bed, and I stared at the ceiling for 6 hours until my alarm went off at 4:30. The second day on the embankment, Becca brought a friend. His name was Devin Akinjobi. He was a wildlife biologist with the Bureau of Land Management who lived in Reedsport, and he had once helped Becca find a wedding ring her ex-husband had thrown into a lake in 2017, which she told me with a small dry smile that suggested the ring had been hers and not the ex-husband's. Devin brought a rake with a finer set of tines than mine and a kneeling pad for his bad knees, and the 3 of us worked the brush in silence for most of the morning. The wind came up around 11 and the alder leaves moved in a way that made everything harder to see, the brown of the leaves and the brown of the dirt blurring together in motion. At 1 o'clock Devin found a piece of the chain. It was about 2 inches long, for small links of it, and the break at one end was clean, the way gold breaks when it has been put under sudden lateral force. I held it in my palm and I could not speak for almost a full minute. It came down the slope, Devin said. The chain came apart on the way down. The rest of it is here somewhere. Or it's at the bottom. The locket is heavier than the chain, Becca said. If they separated, the locket went farther. Toward the river. toward the river. We worked until the light went. We found 2 more links and a small bent piece of the chain's clasp. We did not find the locket. I drove home with the 4 links of chain in a plastic sandwich bag in my coat pocket, and Margaret was waiting on the porch of my cottage with a casserole dish and a folder that was 3 inches thick. I am going to tell you what Margaret showed me that night, because if I tried to summarize it I would leave things out, and I do not want to leave things out. Cedar Hands was incorporated in Oregon in November of 2020. Connor Hales was listed as the registered agent. The president of the board was a man named Robert Pelletier, who lived in Bend and who, as far as Margaret could determine, had once existed but was now dead, having died in 2019 of pancreatic cancer. The secretary was a woman named Linda Chen, who was a real person, Connor's tax accountant, who was almost certainly unaware that her name was on the paperwork. The treasurer was Bryn. Cedar Hands had a website that described it as a grief outreach ministry that helped recently widowed seniors clear out the homes of their late spouses. It accepted donations through a payment processor that routed through a holding LLC in Wyoming. It had a 501(c)(3) determination letter from the IRS that Margaret was almost certain was forged, but she had not yet been able to prove it. What Connor and Bryn did, as far as Margaret had been able to reconstruct it, was this. They identified recently widowed women in coastal and southern Oregon, primarily through obituaries in small-town papers and through a database of property records that flagged ownership changes following spousal deaths. They visited these women, usually as a couple, sometimes with Marlo and Pia, presenting Cedar Hands as a free service. They offered to help sort through the deceased husband's belongings. They took away donations. They sold those donations through a small estate goods storefront in Eugene called Heron and Stone, which was registered to a different LLC, also routed through Wyoming, and which had a steady online business in antique silver, mid-century furniture, fishing tackle, hunting rifles, and jewelry. The storefront was real. The donations were real. The donation receipts the widows received were not. Margaret had found 7 women so far. Dorothea Selk in Florence. A woman named June Hadley in Bandon. A woman named Patricia Yee in Lincoln City. A woman named Eleanor Brim in Brookings. A woman named Constance Vaughn in Yachats. A woman named Mette Solberg in Astoria, who was Norwegian by birth and 90 years old. And a woman named Helen Auerbach in Cannon Beach, who had given them $71,000 in cash from a coffee can her husband had kept under the floor of the back porch. Total losses across the 7 women, by Margaret's estimate, ran to somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in goods and cash, possibly more. Most of the women either did not remember exactly what had been taken, because grief does that, or did not want to admit how much they had given, because shame does that, or had children who had not yet noticed because the children lived in other states and did not visit often. Margaret had not gone to the police because the case was thin. The donations were technically donations. The receipts were technically receipts. The widows had signed papers. Margaret had been waiting, she told me, for one woman who would talk, and one item that could be definitively traced from one of the widows' homes into Heron and Stone's inventory and from there into a sale. And now, she said, the 8th woman is you. They didn't take anything from me, Margaret. They are about to. How do you know? Because Daniel died 3 years ago. Because you live alone. Because they didn't visit you for 9 months and now suddenly they did. Because Bryn watched the necklace on the drive back. Because Connor has been listening to a podcast about distressed assets in your car for 4 days. Because they had it appraised at Christmas. Iris, they are scoping the cottage. I thought about my cottage. I thought about Daniel's grandfather's pocket watch in the top drawer of the desk in the front room. I thought about the silver tea service that had been my mother's, in the cabinet above the refrigerator. I thought about the small Tlingit basket Daniel had bought me in Ketchikan in 1992, which an appraiser had told me 10 years ago was worth somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. I thought about the 8 oil paintings of the southern Oregon coast that hung on the walls of my front room, all painted by a friend of mine named Royce Tannenbaum who had died in 2009 and whose paintings had quadrupled in value at auction since his death. I thought about Daniel's collection of first edition Wallace Stegner novels. I thought about my wedding ring, which I had stopped wearing in 2022 and which sat in a small ceramic dish on top of the dresser. How much do you think they would take from me? I said. Iris, Margaret said, I think they would take everything you would let them take. And then I think they would tell you they were worried about your memory. I did not sleep that night either. I lay on the couch with Margaret's file open on the coffee table next to me, and I read every page of it twice, and around 2 in the morning I got up and I went to the cabinet above the refrigerator and I took down the silver tea service and I put it inside a cardboard box and I put the box in the trunk of my car. Then I took down the pocket watch and the Tlingit basket and the wedding ring and 4 of the 8 Stegner novels, and I put them in the trunk too. Then I sat on the kitchen floor and I made another list. This list was longer. The first item was, do not move anything else tonight, you are exhausted and you will damage things. The second item was, tomorrow, find the locket. The third item was, after the locket, find the key. The fourth item was, after the key, the box. The fifth item was, after the box, decide. I underlined decide 3 times. I did not yet know what I was deciding. I knew only that there would be a decision, and that I needed to be the one who made it. I went to the window before I lay down. The cottage at Sunset Bay faces west. The window in the front room looks out over the bluff and down toward the bay, and on a clear night you can see the lights of the boats coming back from the open water. There were 2 boats out that night. I watched them for a while. I thought about my mother. I thought about her hands. I thought about the way she had looked at me from the hospital bed in the last week of her life, with the morphine making her face soft and her voice careful, and how she had said, Iris, you are going to have to be a tough one. Your father is not going to be much help. I had not understood her then. I had been 11. I had thought she meant that my father would be too sad to take care of me, which he had been. I understood now that she had meant something else. She had meant that the world would teach me, slowly and over many years, what kind of people my own people were going to be, and that I would have to decide each time whether to look away or whether to look. She had decided to look. She had not told me, in so many words, that she had been looking at someone, but I had wondered, since I was 40, whether the someone had been her own brother, who had not come to her funeral. I had never been able to ask her. I had only ever been able to guess. The third day on the embankment, Margaret came with me. Becca was working a shift she could not move, but Devon came back, and the 3 of us worked the strip of brush above the river from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The weather had turned. The wind had a knife in it and the rain came down in spits and starts. Margaret worked on her hands and knees in a yellow rain jacket and a pair of work gloves that had been her father's, and she did not complain once. At one point she paused and looked up at me through the rain and said, Iris, I am 66 years old and I have not been this cold since the winter I covered the Burns occupation in 2016. This is restorative. I am genuinely enjoying myself. I laughed for the first time in 4 days. The laughter surprised me. It came up out of my chest like something that had been waiting. Locked dirt doesn't roll a metal locket, Devon said. But you're right that we've covered this section. Let's move. We moved 12 feet down. We started a new grid. The rain eased. The light through the alders shifted as the clouds opened a little, and a band of pale sun fell across the leaves in a long stripe, and I was sitting back on my heels for a moment to rest my hands when I saw it, or saw something, a small dark oval against the wet brown of a fallen leaf about 6 feet to my left, and I crawled to it on my hands and knees and I picked it up and I held it in my palm and it was the locket. It was face down. The front hinge was wedged into a crevice between 2 roots of an alder. The chain was nowhere. The chain was probably in the river. But the locket was there, and the locket was what mattered, and when Devon came over and turned it gently in my palm and the small piece of folded linen with the 3 red-stitched names on it fell out into the dirt, I sat down on the wet ground and I put my hands over my face and I made a sound that I have made only twice in my life, the other time being when Daniel did not come back from the hospital in 2011. Margaret picked the linen up. She handed it to me. She did not say anything. She just put her hand on my shoulder and she kept it there until I could stand up. The second hinge was intact. I could see that even from where I sat. The locket had landed in a way that had protected it. The back panel was closed. I did not open it on the embankment. I put the locket in the inside pocket of my coat, against my breastbone where it belonged, and we climbed back up the slope together, Devon going first to make a path for me and Margaret coming up behind me to catch me if I slid, and at the top I sat in the front seat of my Subaru for 10 minutes before I trusted my hands to drive. We opened the second hinge in my kitchen at Sunset Bay at 4:15 that afternoon. Margaret had a small flathead screwdriver from her glove compartment. The hinge opened cleanly. The key was inside. The folded paper was inside. The paper was creased and yellow but the ink was still readable. Daniel's handwriting. His name. The account number of the safe deposit box. The address of the Umpqua Bank branch on Newmark Avenue in North Bend. Iris, Margaret said. Yes. Do you want to open the box tomorrow? Yes. We opened the box on Friday morning. It was a medium box, 8 by 10 by 22 inches, and it was full. It held 3 things. The first was an envelope of cash. $20,000 in $100 bills, banded. The second was a manila folder with a typed letter on the top, signed by Daniel and dated October 11, 2011, 3 weeks before he died, and underneath the letter a stack of paperwork 2 inches thick. The third was a small velvet jewelry box. I read the letter first. I sat in one of the small private rooms the bank gives you for this kind of thing, and Margaret sat across from me, and I read the letter out loud because I could not have read it silently without breaking, and Margaret needed to hear it anyway because she was about to do what she was about to do. Iris, the letter began. If you are reading this, our daughter has done something I prayed she would not do. I want you to know that I saw it in her when she was 17, and I did not say anything to you, because I did not want it to be true. I saw it again when she was 24. I saw it the day she brought Connor to dinner in 2008. I saw it the Christmas of 2010, the last Christmas I had with her, when she asked me what my retirement accounts were worth and I told her, and the way her face changed when I told her was the way her face changed when she was 7 years old and I told her she could not have a pony. I have set aside in this box the following. $20,000 in cash, which is yours, free and clear, to do with as you wish. A folder of documentation. The documentation is of the years Bryn worked at the Pacific Maritime Title Company in Coos Bay between 2009 and 2014. You will recall that she left that job suddenly in March of 2014 and that she would not tell us why. The reason she left was that the company's internal audit found that she had been altering the closing documents on 3 real estate transactions to redirect a portion of the closing funds into a personal account she controlled. The total taken was $17,400. The company did not press charges because her supervisor was her Uncle Roy, my brother, who put the $17,400 back into the company's escrow account out of his own pocket and made her sign a statement admitting what she had done. The statement is in this folder. The internal audit report is in this folder. Roy gave them to me in 2014 and asked me to keep them, in case. I never told you because I could not bring myself to. I am telling you now because if you are reading this, you need them. Use them however you need to. Iris. I love you. I have always loved you. I should have told you about Bryn years ago. I am sorry. Take care of yourself. Do not let her take anything else from you. Daniel. When I finished reading, I put the letter down on the table and I sat with my hands flat on either side of it and I did not move for a long time. Margaret did not move either. Then I picked up the velvet box and I opened it and I looked at my mother's ring, which I had not seen since 1971, and I closed the box and I put it in my purse, and I picked up the manila folder, and I put that in my purse too, and I picked up the envelope of cash, and I put that in an inside pocket of my coat, and I stood up. Margaret, I said. I need to make a phone call. To whom? To the Oregon Department of Justice. The financial fraud section. Do you have a name? I have 3 names, she said. The one you want is Anita Bordelon. She runs the Elder Financial Abuse Unit. I have her direct line. I have been holding it for 2 years waiting for you. I called Anita Bordelon from my kitchen at 6 o'clock that evening. I talked to her for 47 minutes. I told her about Cedar Hands. I told her about the 7 women Margaret had identified. I told her about Heron and Stone. I told her about the necklace. I told her about Bryn and the title company in 2014 and the documents in my purse. I told her about Daniel. Anita Bordelon listened. She asked good questions. She did not interrupt. When I finished she said, Mrs. Halvik, I want you to come to Salem on Monday. I will pay for your gas. Bring everything Mrs. Izawa has gathered. Bring your husband's letter. Bring the statement from the title company. Do not contact your daughter between now and Monday. If she contacts you, tell her you are not feeling well and that you will call her back later in the week. Can you do that? Yes. Mrs. Halvik, I have to tell you something. Charity fraud cases against family members are extremely hard to prosecute. They take a long time. They can be cruel to the victims. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. I thought about the slope of the embankment above the Umpqua. I thought about Bryn flicking her wrist. I thought about Connor in the driver's seat looking at his phone. I thought about Marlo with her hand over her mouth. I thought about Dorothea Selk in Florence and the 9 boxes that had gone out the door of her house. I thought about Meta Solberg in Astoria, who was 90 years old and Norwegian and who had probably had her own necklace from her own grandmother in the boxes that the kind young people from Cedar Hands had carried away. Yes, I said. I am prepared for that. We drove to Salem on Monday. Margaret drove. I sat in the passenger seat with the manila folder on my lap and the locket around my neck on a new chain I had bought at a jeweler in Coos Bay on Saturday, a chain that did not match the original but that held the weight in the same place. We met with Anita Bordelon and 2 investigators and a deputy attorney general named Owen Tessaro who had soft eyes and a hard mouth and who, after looking through Margaret's file for 40 minutes, said, Mrs. Izawa, why are you not still a reporter? Because the paper laid us off in 2009, Margaret said. And because I needed health insurance. We spent 6 hours in that conference room in Salem. The 2 investigators, a man named Albert Quint and a woman named Perry Sundaram, asked questions in a kind of careful rotation that I came to understand was deliberate, designed to keep me from getting tired and to keep me telling the story in chronological order. Owen Tessaro asked the harder questions. He asked me whether I had any history of mental illness. He asked me whether I was on any medications that might affect memory or judgment. He asked me whether I had any reason to believe my daughter had ever been treated for a personality disorder. He apologized before each question. I told him not to apologize. He was doing his job. The defense was going to ask the same questions and harder. At one point in the afternoon Perry asked me whether Bryn had ever been physically violent with me. I told her no. I told her about a moment in 2009 when Bryn had grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise during an argument about Daniel's medication. I told her about a moment in 2015 when Bryn had thrown a cordless phone at the wall behind my head and the phone had broken into 3 pieces. I told her about the wrist grab a week before Daniel's funeral, when Bryn had held my arm to keep me from going back into the bedroom to put a handkerchief in Daniel's pocket. The handkerchief had been his father's. He had carried it for 60 years. Bryn had not wanted me to put it in his pocket because she had wanted Marlo to have it. The funeral home had been waiting. I had been crying. Bryn had held my wrist and said, very quietly, Mom, stop being dramatic. I had not gone back into the bedroom. The handkerchief had stayed in the dresser. I had not thought about it again until that moment in Salem. Perry wrote it all down. She did not look up. When I was finished she said, Mrs. Halvik, you understand that what you have just described is a pattern of escalating control. Yes? I do now. Okay. She turned the page in her notebook and we went on. The investigation took 6 weeks to assemble. I will not pretend it was clean. I will not pretend it did not cost me. Bryn called me 4 times during those 6 weeks and I told her, each time, that I had a bad cold, that I had a stomach bug, that I was sleeping a lot, that I would call her back when I felt better. Connor called twice. He said he wanted to come down to look for the necklace. I told him not to bother, that I had hired someone, that it had been found. He went very quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, "That's great, Iris. That's wonderful news." His voice was the voice of a man trying to figure out what I knew. I told him I was tired and that I had to go. During those 6 weeks, the investigators interviewed each of the 7 widows Margaret had found. Margaret went with them to the first 3 interviews. She did not go with them to the rest because Owen Tesaro told her she could not, that her presence would compromise the testimony, that her file would be the foundation of the case but that she had to step back now. She stepped back. She did not like it. She came to my cottage on the weekend after she stepped back, and she sat on my front porch with a glass of red wine and she did not say much, and after a while she said, "Iris, I should have done something about this in 2022. When Dorothea Selk first came in. I should have called the AG then. You did not have enough then. I had enough to call. I just did not call. Margaret. I know. I know. I am working on it." I put my hand on her wrist. We watched the light go down over the bay. The Lupins were just coming up in the side bed. I thought about how many years Margaret and I had known each other. 34. I thought about the time in 1994 when she had driven me to Portland for a procedure I did not want to tell Daniel about and had waited in the lobby for 6 hours and had driven me home and had stayed 3 nights in my guest bedroom afterward and had cooked for me and had never, in all the years since, mentioned it once. I thought about how the things people do for you are sometimes invisible until you need to count them, and how, when you do count them, they are almost always more than you remember. Connor was arrested on the 14th of May at his office in Eugene. Bryn was arrested at the front door of her house at 4:30 in the afternoon while Marlo was in the front yard waiting for the school bus. Marlo saw it happen. The investigators called me from the curb before they did it, to let me know, and I asked them to please be careful with my granddaughter, and the investigator I talked to, Perry, said she would handle it herself, and she did. She walked Marlo across the yard and into a neighbor's kitchen before they took her mother out of the house in cuffs. The neighbor was a woman named Annette Yost, who had been Bryn's neighbor for 6 years and who, it turned out, had been one of the people Margaret had not been able to find. Her mother in Newport had given $3,800 to Cedar Hands in the spring of 2023. Annette had recognized the name when the search warrants were served and she had recognized Connor's face from the website. She had not put it together that the woman who lived next door, whose kids she had babysat, was the same Bryn Hales who was on the donation receipts. She put it together that afternoon, in her kitchen, while Marlo sat at her table eating a peanut butter sandwich and not crying because Marlo did not cry, Marlo just watched things and remembered them. I drove to Eugene that night. I drove the 4 hours from Sunset Bay to Annette Yost's kitchen and I did not stop except for gas. Margaret came with me. Perry Sundaram met me at Annette's house at 9 in the evening with a temporary custody order signed by an emergency family court judge in Lane County, granting me physical custody of Marlo and Pia pending a full hearing. Annette had Pia upstairs in her son's old bedroom, asleep in her clothes. Marlo was still at the kitchen table. She had not slept. I sat down across from her. I did not say anything for a long minute. She looked at me. She looked older than 10 years old. She looked older than I felt. "Grandma," she said. "Yes, sweetheart. They said Mommy and Daddy stole things from old ladies." "That's what they think, yes." "Did Mommy steal your necklace?" "She threw it." "She didn't steal it." "But she meant to take something from me." "Yes." "Did you find it?" "I found it." "Can I see it?" I unbuttoned the top button of my blouse and I leaned forward and I took the locket off over my head and I put it into her hand. She held it for a long time. She turned it over. She opened the front hinge and looked at the small piece of red-stitched linen. She closed it again. "It's not junk," she said. "No. Mommy said it was junk." "I know. Mommy is wrong about lots of things." "Yes." She handed it back to me. I put it back on. She watched me put it back on. Then she said, "Grandma, are we going to live with you?" "For a while." "Yes." "Pia too?" "Pia too." "Okay." That was all she said. "Okay." She got up from the table and she went and got her backpack from where she had left it by the front door, and she came back, and she stood next to my chair, and she leaned her head against my shoulder for about 3 seconds, which is the longest she had ever done that in her life, and then she straightened up and she said, "I'm ready when you are." We drove back to Sunset Bay through the night. Margaret drove. Pia slept in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit. Marlo sat in the middle seat with her seat belt on and her backpack at her feet, and she watched out the window at the dark trees going past, and around 2 in the morning, somewhere west of Drain, she said, very quietly, so as not to wake her sister, "Grandma, I saw her do it." "I know you did, sweetheart." "I should have said something." "You're 10 years old. You did the right thing." Saying something to your mother in that moment would not have changed anything except how she treated you afterward. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "You have nothing to be sorry for." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Grandma, what was inside it?" I thought about how to answer her. I thought about whether a 10-year-old could carry the weight of what was inside it. Then I thought about the fact that she had already carried more than most 10-year-olds carry, and that lying to her now would be a worse betrayal than telling her the truth. "There was a key inside it," I said. "And a piece of paper." The piece of paper had the number of a box at a bank. "The box belonged to your grandpa. He hid it for me before he died. He thought your mom might do something one day that would make me need what was in it." "What was in the box?" "Money. And papers that proved your mom had done something wrong at a job a long time ago." "Before I was born?" "Yes. A year before you were born." "Did Grandpa know she was bad?" "I don't think she's bad, sweetheart. I think she made some choices that were bad. The choices aren't the same as the person." "Grandma." "Yes. I think she's bad." I did not answer her. I reached back over the seat and I put my hand on her knee and I left it there for a while, and after a long time she put her hand on top of mine, and the two of us rode like that, my hand on her knee, her hand on mine, all the way down the long dark curve of Highway 38 along the Umpqua, past the mile marker where the necklace had gone over the edge, past it without me having to point it out to her because she already knew, into the morning, into the rest of our lives. The case took 14 months. I will spare you most of it. I will tell you the parts that mattered. I wrote him back. I told him she was telling the truth as best she could and that we were doing the same. I told him to come visit if he was ever on the coast. He came in August, with his wife, and they stayed at the inn in Charleston for 3 nights, and Marlo spent 2 afternoons with them walking the trails at Cape Arago, and when she came back from the second afternoon she said to me, "Mr. Pasternak says the trees here are different from the trees in Eugene." I said that was true. She said, "He says they are older. He says the ones in Eugene got cut down a long time ago and grew back. The ones here didn't." I said that was also true. She thought about it for a while. Then she said, "Grandma, I want to be the kind of tree that didn't get cut down." I think about that often. I think about it when I think about the things I want her to learn and the things I cannot teach her and the things she is going to have to teach herself. The second thing that mattered was Pia. Pia was 6. Pia did not understand most of what had happened. Pia understood that her mother and father were gone. Pia understood that she lived with Grandma now and that Aunt Margaret was here a lot and that there was a beach down the hill and that the deer ate the flowers. Pia did not ask many questions for the first 3 months. Then, in August, she started asking questions. Where is Mommy? Is she sick? Is she at work? When is she coming? I had decided, with Margaret, that we would tell Pia the truth in pieces, in the sizes she could carry. I told her that her mother was in a place where people had to go when they had done something wrong. I told her that her mother had taken things from other grandmas that didn't belong to her. I told her that her mother and father were going to be in that place for a while and that we did not know exactly how long. I told her that her mother loved her. I told her that her mother had done a bad thing but that I was not going to tell her that her mother was a bad person, because I did not know yet, and I was not going to lie to her, and the choice of what to call her mother was going to be hers to make when she was older. Pia listened. She thought. She said, Grandma, did Mommy take the necklace from another grandma too? No, I said. The necklace is mine. Then why did she throw it? Because she did not want me to have it anymore. Why not? Because it was worth something to me, and she did not understand why. Pia thought about this for a long time. She was sitting on the kitchen floor when I told her, with a coloring book open in front of her and a green crayon in her hand. Eventually she said, Grandma, I would not throw your necklace. I know you wouldn't, sweetheart. I would put it in a box and keep it safe for you. I know you would. She went back to coloring. The conversation was over. I left it alone. 2 days later she came to me with a small wooden box she had found in the garage, one of Daniel's old fly-tying boxes, and she said, Grandma, when you die, can I have the necklace? I will put it in this box. Yes, sweetheart. When I die you can have it. Okay. She put the box on the kitchen counter and went outside to look for snails. We have a lot of snails in the side bed. She likes them. She names them. There is a snail named Captain Walter who has been with us, by Pia's accounting, since the 2nd week of May. He may or may not be the same snail. I have not asked. The third thing that mattered was the trial. Connor took a plea in November. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and 1 count of elder financial abuse in the 2nd degree, and he received 9 years in federal prison and a restitution order of $412,000 that he will probably never fully pay. He turned on Bryn as part of his plea. He had been planning to turn on her, the investigators told me later, almost from the moment of his arrest. He had been planning to turn on her for years. Bryn did not take a plea. Bryn went to trial in March, 14 months after the search warrants. The trial lasted 9 days. I testified on the 4th day. I had thought it would be the hardest thing I had ever done. It was not. The hardest thing I had ever done was the 3 days on the embankment. Testifying was just talking, and I had been a reference librarian for 31 years, and what I knew how to do better than almost anything was answer a question precisely with only the information that had been asked for. The prosecutor was Owen Tesaro. The defense attorney was a man from Portland whose name I do not need to give you. He asked me, on cross-examination, whether I had any proof that my daughter had thrown the necklace deliberately. He asked me whether I might have been mistaken, given my age, about what I had seen. He asked me whether I had taken any medications that day that might have affected my perception. He asked me whether I had been estranged from my daughter and had a motive to harm her. I answered each question without raising my voice. Owen objected to one of them. The judge sustained the objection. The defense attorney sat down. On the 7th day Dorothea Selk testified. She was 75 by then. She had driven down from Florence with her son. She walked to the stand slowly and she sat down and she put her hands in her lap and she told the jury about the 9 boxes. She told them about the coin collection. She told them about a small leather-bound prayer book her husband had carried in his pocket through the Korean War, which she had wrapped in tissue paper and put in box 4, and which had been recovered by the investigators in May, sitting on a shelf in the back room of Heron and Stone with a price tag of $45 on it. She told the jury that her husband's name had been Anthony and that they had been married for 51 years and that he had been a good man and that she had given his prayer book to people who said they were going to put it on a shelf in their church so that other widows could come and hold it when they came to grieve. She said she did not know whether to be more ashamed of having believed them or more sad that she had. The defense attorney did not ask her many questions on cross. He had been told by his client, I think, not to push her. The jury came back on the 9th day. They convicted her on every count except one. The count they did not convict her on was the most minor of the 10. She was sentenced in June to 7 years in state prison and a separate restitution order. She did not look at me when the verdict was read. She did look at Marlo, who was not in the courtroom because I would not bring her, but Bryn looked at the back of the room where she had thought Marlo might be, and her face did something then that I will not describe to you, because some things should not be described to strangers. Marlo and Pia have lived with me at Sunset Bay since the night of May 14th. Margaret moved into the small guest cottage on the back of my property in August, because the drive from Charleston had started to wear on her and because she wanted to be near the children, and because the truth was that the 3 of us, 4 of us with Pia, had become a household, and a household needs all of its people under one roof or close to it. Margaret cooks more than I do. I read with the children at night. Pia has decided she wants to be a marine biologist, which is what most 6-year-olds on the Oregon coast decide they want to be, and which she may or may not still want by the time she is 20, but in the meantime we have bought her a tide pool guide and a small pair of waterproof binoculars and we walk down to the rocks below the bluffs every Saturday morning at low tide. Marlo has not decided what she wants to be. She is 12 now. She still does not cry easily. She does, sometimes, when she does not know I am watching, take the locket off the small ceramic dish on top of my dresser where I keep it at night, and hold it in her hand for a minute or two, and put it back. I let her. I have told her that when I die, the locket is hers. She did not say anything when I told her. She nodded, the way her trooper friend Becca nods, once, slowly. Becca Ramsey comes to dinner once a month. Devin Akinjobi comes too sometimes, and brings a fish. He brought a steelhead the last Saturday in October that he had caught in the Smith River that morning. Margaret cleaned it on the back porch and we ate it that night with rice and the last of the green beans from the side garden, and after dinner Pia asked Devin to tell her about all the animals he had ever rescued. And he sat at the kitchen table for an hour telling her about a black bear cub he had hand-fed in 2019 and a sea otter that had been hit by a boat in Charleston Harbor in 2021 and a barn owl with a broken wing that he had splinted and released, and Pia listened with her chin in her hands and at the end she said, Devin, I want to be a wildlife biologist when I grow up, not a marine biologist, and Devin said, very seriously, you can be both, Pia. Some people are. She thought about that. She has been thinking about it since. I want to tell you about a few other things and then I will stop. The investigation that started with Cedar Hands grew, the way these things grow. Owen Tesaro's office and the Postal Inspection Service uncovered 3 other small operations in Oregon and 1 in Washington that had been using similar models, and the resulting cases identified, in total, 63 widows across the 2 states who had been victimized by some variant of the grief charity model. Most of the goods have been recovered. Most of the cash has not. The Oregon legislature, in its 2025 session, passed a bill that Anita Bourdalan helped write, requiring stricter registration and disclosure for any nonprofit operating an in-home estate clearance service for seniors. The bill is called the Halvik-Izawa Act. I did not ask for that and I did not particularly want it, but Margaret was pleased, and Margaret deserves to be pleased, so I have stopped arguing with her about it. I sold the silver tea service that had been my mother's. I did not need it. The proceeds, together with most of the $20,000 that had been in the box, went into a trust for Marlo and Pia, administered by a lawyer in Coos Bay whom I trust. The money my mother's ring would bring, if I sold it, will go into the trust too, eventually. For now, I wear the ring. It does not quite fit my finger anymore, my hands having gotten thinner with age, but I have it sized down and it sits next to my wedding band, and it sometimes catches the light through the kitchen window in the afternoon in a way that makes me think my mother and Daniel are both, somewhere, paying attention. The 4 paintings by Royce Tannenbaum that I had taken off the walls and packed away the night after Margaret first came to my cottage with her file, I put back on the walls in June. Marlo asked me why I had taken them down. I told her the truth. She thought about it. Then she said, "You should put them back, Grandma. They look nice up there." So I put them back. I have not spoken to Bryn since the day of her arrest. She has written me 3 letters from the Women's Correctional Facility in Wilsonville. I have not opened any of them. They are in a drawer in my desk. I do not know whether I will ever open them. I think probably I will not. Margaret says it does not matter whether I do or do not, that the letters are not for me anyway, that the letters are for Bryn, that they are a thing she is writing to herself with my name on the envelope, and that I owe her nothing on that front. I think Margaret is right. I think I will keep the letters in the drawer and not open them, and one day, when I am dead, Marlo will find them, and Marlo will decide what to do with them. I trust Marlo to decide. In September, Marlo asked me whether she could write to her mother. I told her she could. I told her she could write whatever she wanted, that I would not read it, that I would mail it for her, and that whatever her mother wrote back, if her mother wrote back, would also be hers, and that I would not read those letters either. She thought about it for almost 2 weeks. Then one afternoon she came to me with a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded into thirds. She had written 1 sentence on it. I do not know what the sentence was. She put it in an envelope herself and she addressed it herself, and I took her to the post office in Coos Bay on a Saturday morning and she put it in the slot herself. I did not ask her how she felt afterward. I did not need to. She walked next to me on the sidewalk on the way back to the car, and at one point she put her hand in mine, and we walked the last block like that, my hand in hers, the way she had let me hold her hand when she was 4, and we had walked together to the duck pond at Alton Baker Park on a visit to Eugene in 2017 when Daniel was still alive and Bryn had not yet become the person who would do what she would do, and I felt then, in the small soft pressure of her hand in mine, that something had moved, that some part of what had been broken in the back seat of her father's car on Highway 38 had begun the slow work of mending. Her mother wrote back. Marlo read the letter alone in her room with the door closed for 40 minutes and then she came out and she went to the bathroom and she washed her face and she came down to dinner and she did not say a word about it that night or any other night since, and I have not asked, and I will not ask, because that letter is between her and her mother, and one day, if Marlo wants to tell me what was in it, she will, and if she does not want to, she will not, and either choice is a choice she has the right to make. I want to say one last thing about the 3 days, because the 3 days are what people ask me about most when they hear the story. What I learned in those 3 days, on my hands and knees in the brush above the Umpqua, with my pants torn and my back screaming and my hands black with dirt and alder rot, was that the thing my daughter had thrown out the window was not a piece of jewelry. The thing my daughter had thrown out the window was the part of me that had still believed she would not do exactly what she did. The locket had been around my neck for 53 years. The belief had been around my neck for 41. When the locket left, the belief left with it. And what I had to do, in those 3 days, was decide whether to spend the rest of my life mourning the belief or whether to climb down the embankment and look for what was actually there. What was actually there was a piece of plated gold with a hidden compartment, made by a Norwegian jeweler in the 1880s for a woman who was about to cross an ocean and who knew she would need to hide things from the people who said they loved her. What was actually there was a key. What was actually there was a husband who had loved me enough, in the last weeks of his life, to leave me something I could use. What was actually there was a friend who had been keeping a file for 2 years, waiting. What was actually there was a state trooper named Becca Ramsey who carried a metal detector in her truck and who, when she heard my story, knew it because she had heard versions of it before. What was actually there was a wildlife biologist with bad knees. What was actually there was my granddaughter Marlo, who had seen what her mother did and had known, at 10 years old, that it was wrong, and who had been waiting, the way Margaret had been waiting, for someone to come and put it right. What was actually there was me, 68 years old, on my hands and knees, refusing to stop looking. I think about that sometimes when I am walking down to the tide pools with Pia on Saturday mornings, her small hand in mine, the wind off the bay coming up the bluff with the smell of kelp on it. I think about how close I came to staying in the car. I think about how close I came to letting Bryn tell me what the necklace was worth. I think about all the women, the 63 women, who had let someone tell them what their husbands' lives had been worth, what their husbands' coin collections and pocket watches and purple hearts had been worth, and who had nodded and signed the donation forms and watched the boxes go out the door, because nobody had taught them that the things people said they loved you for and the things people actually wanted from you were not always the same things. Bryn called the necklace junk because she could not see what was in it. She could not see what was in it because she had not been taught to look. I taught her many things when she was a child. I taught her to read and to swim and to ride a bicycle and to tie her shoes. I did not teach her to look. I do not know whose fault that is. I have stopped trying to figure out whose fault that is. What I am teaching Marlo and Pia, every day, is to look. Pia, when we go to the tide pools, knows the difference now between a hermit crab and an empty shell. She knows the difference between an anemone that is closed because it is dry and an anemone that is closed because it is afraid. She knows that if you wait long enough and stand still enough, the small things come out. I told her last Saturday that this was the most important thing anyone could know, and she looked at me with the small grave face that Pia has, and she said, "Grandma, I already knew that." I think she did. Marlo knows other things. Marlo knows how to read a person across a room. Marlo knows how to tell when someone is lying. Marlo knew, from the back seat of her father's car on the 2nd of April, what was about to happen, and she could not stop it, and she has been carrying that for almost 2 years, and I have been trying to teach her that carrying something is not the same as causing it, and I think she is starting to learn. Last month she asked me if she could have the 4 links of chain that Devon found on the second day. I gave them to her. She put them in a small wooden box that her grandfather had made, that I had given her when she moved in, and she keeps the box on her dresser. She has not told me why she wanted the links. I have not asked. Some things you keep without knowing why, and the reason becomes clear later, sometimes much later, sometimes after the person who kept them is gone. She has started writing things down. Not a journal, exactly, but a small notebook she keeps under her mattress, which I have seen the corner of when I change her sheets and which I have never opened. She writes in it most evenings before she goes to sleep. Margaret asked her once what she was writing. Marlo said, "Things I want to remember." Margaret asked her if she would ever let anyone read it. Marlo said, "Maybe when I am old. Maybe Pia, if she wants to know things." Then she went outside to feed Fairy, the cat that wandered up out of the salmonberry hedge in September of last year and decided to stay, which Pia named after the Coos Bay ferry that used to run before the bridge was built, which she learned about from a book Margaret gave her. The deer still eat my lupins. The lupins still come back. I am 69 years old now. I have a year on Margaret. The cottage at Sunset Bay has 4 people and a guest cottage and 1 cat and a small vegetable garden Pia and I planted in May from seeds Margaret had been saving for 3 years in glass jars in her pantry. The lettuce did well. The tomatoes did poorly. The beans were astonishing. We had so many beans in August that I gave bags of them away to everyone who came to the door, and the postwoman, whose name is Jolene, asked me for the recipe of the dilled green beans I made from the jars I gave her in September, and I told her my mother's recipe out of my memory, and the next time she came to the door she brought me a small jar of her own dilled green beans and we stood on the porch tasting them and arguing politely about whether you should add a teaspoon of mustard seed at the end or at the beginning, and I told her my mother had said the beginning, and she said her mother had said the end, and we both laughed because of course our mothers would have disagreed about it, mothers always do. And there was nothing left of the disagreement to hurt anybody, because both our mothers had been dead a long time. That kind of disagreement is a gift. I did not know that until I was 69. I wear the locket every day. The new chain is heavier than the old one. It does not break. I have not opened the second hinge again since the night Margaret and I opened it at the kitchen table, because there is nothing in it now, and there does not need to be. The compartment is empty. The compartment knows it is empty. That is enough. What I want you to understand, if you are listening to this and you are someone's mother or someone's grandmother and you have been told for a long time that the things you love are junk, is that the people telling you that are telling you about themselves. They are telling you what they cannot see. They are telling you what they have not been taught to look for. They are not telling you about your necklace. They are not telling you about your life. They are telling you about the small, narrow place inside themselves where the part that knows how to love something for its own sake should have grown, and did not. You do not have to listen to them. You can climb down the embankment. You can take a rake and a sieve and a thermos of coffee, and you can spend 3 days on your hands and knees in the wet leaves, and you can find what you came for. And then you can come back up the slope, and you can put the thing back where it belongs, and you can go on with the rest of your life, which is yours, and which has always been yours, and which no one, no matter what they say, has the right to throw away. The necklace is around my neck. The light is coming in through the kitchen window. Pia is drawing at the table. Marlo is reading on the couch with Fairy on her stomach. Margaret is in the garden. The wind is up off the bay. I am here. The necklace is here. We are both still here.